Well, it's got to be music to the ears of Brian Smith, longtime recruiting analyst, host of the Portal podcast, and Locked On Seminoles, that Florida State is moving upwards. Brian, I know you've had your doubts and criticisms of Mike Norvell and his staff, but you can't look at the last couple weeks and not at the very least say it's better, right?
Well, they went from a recruiting class that I was like, I don't know if this is going to end top 20 to like right now On3 has them number 11. They're ahead of some schools like Bama and Texas and some of the different, like if you're in that conversation, kind of hard to really pick on them. And it's also kind of hard to be mad when you're flipping kids right and left. So I'm going to sit here and say, you know what? Congrats, tip of the cap. Florida State put in some work, and they've gotten some good players. And they're kind of moving on. I'm like, okay, this is fun. This is what it's supposed to be like. But it had been a while. Just for full effect here, the weakest thing about Norvell's resume as the head coach at Florida State, he's not a good recruiter. He has not had a top 10 class at Florida State in 5 years.
That is not good.
That is flat out unacceptable. It's Florida State. Within a 300-mile radius, you can recruit a top 10 class every year. Not even counting getting down to Miami and stuff like that. Like you can literally recruit a top 10 class. So they haven't hit their mark. They changed the staff around. They've added kids from D.C. and they've added kids from California, but they've done most of their work where they should, in the Sunshine State and in Georgia, especially Atlanta. It's great. The latest kid is Jay Timmons, DB, whose dad played linebacker at Florida State, Lawrence Timmons, and for this other team you probably heard of, the Pittsburgh Steelers. So it's always good to get guys like that. I mean, they're solid.
Yeah.
So it's just nice because they're not getting every kid, but they're on a roll right now, and it's nice, man, because they've got around 20 recruits. There's no way this isn't going to end up a top 20 class, barring something unforeseen. And it's fun to actually do Locked On Seminole shows now. It is fun.
Yeah, my good friend, he and his wife are Steelers fans, and they would be very upset if I didn't point out that solid is the only thing you say about the Steelers, because they're never anything more than that. They're just solid. They're not elite. They're not ascending. They're right there, stuck in neutral. But Florida State not in that particular camp. And you mentioned that they've done a better job of recruiting the area closest to them. That reminds me of another school, Brian, who has historically been a recruiting power, is in a coastal state, has a lot of talent in its backyard, and has underachieved on the trail for a long time, and has all of a sudden started to surge in a significant way, beginning with the talent that is really close to its very own campus. Can you identify the program I'm describing right now?
There's several that it could be, but I don't know. A&M and Miami, there's a lot of them. Which one are you?
I was thinking about USC. USC, that, of course, has the number one class in the country at the moment. That's partially, but not entirely, due to having a higher volume of players than everybody else. What I hear Trojan fans talking about all the time, and also what I see in the recruiting results and the wins that USC has had, is they have realized, you know what? Let's do our best. We're never going to fully put up the fence around Southern California the way that we used to, because recruiting has just become too national now. Oregon can recruit there. Bama can recruit there. Rider Lions just committed to BYU, and USC finished really third in that recruitment for a 5-star quarterback. Like, that's where I think, have really focused. So bringing this back to Florida State, do you think that's the primary driver of their recent success, and is a long-term plan, it seems, for the staff?
I think it has to be, because there have been a lot of people, fans included, rightfully so, that said, how come we're losing all these kids from inside the state? Over half the top kids leave the state of Florida now, even with Miami and Florida State. It's kind of hard to believe, but over half the top kids leave. Not great, as the saying goes. When I was a kid, like 75, 80% of the top 25 players in the Sunshine State went to Miami, Florida State. Just so happens there were many times during any given season they were ranked 3 of the top 5 teams in the country. It's not a coincidence that they were keeping those players home inside the state of Florida. So it is a priority. They've got more guys now on the staff that are just good recruiters. And like both the DB coaches, including Sertan, are from South Florida. That is not a coincidence. That is very, very helpful. They've got multiple DB recruits committed from, guess where, Spencer?
Florida.
South Florida. Even.
South Florida specifically, yes.
Yeah. I mean, that's bottom line, man. They're getting the skill kids they didn't used to get. They're adding some good linemen too. There's still ways to go. They just missed on Aaron Thomas, which that was a big miss, but you're not going to get everybody. They're getting the players, though, that give them a chance to have a top 10 class. Again, it has been a minute. If you're going to get out of the gutter, which 2 and 10 is absolutely the gutter, you got to recruit. And they have changed their staff, and they're doing it. So I'm happy to report good news for a change. It has been really rough here. And a lot of my fans are complaining about it, but I just report the news. Today's podcast was the most positive one I've had in eons. So it's fun to do that, and I really enjoy it.
You mentioned Surtain being on the staff. Would that be the father of Pat Surtain II, the Broncos corner?
That would be the one.
I did not. I learned something today here in our recording of Locked On College Football today, folks, and that doesn't happen every day. Usually I know everything I want to talk about and discuss before I do a show. That's kind of how podcasting and content creation works. But the last thing on the Florida State front I wanted to ask you about, Brian. Mike Norvell, of course, clean house with his 2 coordinators. You have Gus Malzahn as the offensive coordinator. You have Coach White coming over as a defensive coordinator from Nebraska, where he was very successful on that side. I mean, immediately. I could readily make the case that's a better hire even than Gus Malzahn, who I still think is good. But I think that defensive staff could have a greater impact. How much impact do you sense those 2 particular hires are having on FSU here in the last couple of weeks?
I spoke to Devin Carter this weekend, and he flipped from Auburn to Florida State, and he said that Malzahn was a major factor in it. So I just asked him open-endedly, and he brought up Gus point blank. So that was a good sign. And defensively, Coach White gets brought up a lot. Pot roast, as they call him, the defensive line coach. Terrence Knighton's brought up a lot. That's the name he goes by. It's a great name. That's what he got nicknamed in the NFL, and it's just always stuck. He ordered pot roast one time on a team plane, and somebody called him pot roast, and the rest. That's what he said to the media. Like, that's where he got it.
And he's a defensive line coach?
What a great nickname.
Phenomenal. That's phenomenal.
It might be the best nickname in college football right now as far as consistent coaches go. That's hard to beat. But he's a really good recruiter. They're in on more kids. They've gotten some D linemen they weren't supposed to get. This is how you win games. Bobby Bowden used to steal kids out of Georgia. They've gotten a couple of defensive tackles that SEC schools wanted. Coming off at 2 and 10. Is that coincidence? No. It is about relationships, as I say on this show all the time. Florida State's got better recruiters now. And it's not hard to really sell Florida State. It's just not. So if you get people that are passionate about it, you're going to make some moves. And Florida State's done it. Now the question is, can they get over the top and get a couple more kids that are those truly elite guys to finish in the top 10? But, there's a long way to go before December, so we'll see if it happens.
Real quick, before you stick around for the final segment of today's show and we talk about the 5 stars that Texas and Texas A&M landed in the SEC, what went through your mind when you saw Thomas Castellanos saying Alabama isn't diddly squat?
Not the brightest decision before the end of summer. I know Thomas, we're friends. Not the best thing to say.
Yeah.
I don't know if that was a moment of just unknown stupidity that just kind of came out because, you just don't want to poke the bear. But you're the one they're going to try to smack around anyway. And I know you're as good an athlete as there is in college football, but there's just no reason to do